Hi, I'm Chuck Gifford, and I'll be reading you selections from this week's August the 8th Nantucket Inquirer Mirror. Our first story today comes from the top of the front page and is headlined, Housing Bond Bill Still Helps Advocates Say by John Stanton. The most comprehensive housing legislation in state history failed to deliver the real estate transfer fee that islanders had been working toward for almost 2 decades. But the Affordable Homes Act, the $5.2 billion bill signed into law by Governor Maura Healey Tuesday, contains provisions that local housing advocates say will be useful tools in dealing with the island's affordable housing crisis. The elephant in the room is that what is missing is funding, and that was to come from the transfer fee, said Tucker Holland, the former town housing director and now an independent consultant. These are all good and helpful provisions, but ultimately there's just no way that tinkering with some of the elements will really move the needle in a real and significant way without the transfer fee or some other funding source like it. The beneficial provisions fall under the heading of the Seasonal Communities designation, which is aimed at helping make year-round housing attainable in places like Nantucket by removing some of the statutory restrictions. Ann Kuspa, executive director of Nantucket Housing, said that the most exciting provision is one offering a route to year-round deed restrictions without regulatory requirements based on area mean income levels. It is hard to access programs from the state because they aren't applicable here. Our AMI levels are really high and construction costs are really high. Subsidies just don't bridge the huge gap of what it costs here on Nantucket, she said. The median cost of a single-family home on Nantucket is $3.5 million. State programs that fund housing initiatives often require applicants to earn below a certain percentage of the mean income of a municipality. Even if you're earning 240% of area median income, the open market on Nantucket is really not affordable to you, she said. The town is working on a year-round deed restriction capability, and this is a tool for that. All that is really needed is that you live here year-round. I think it's a good tool. Right now, you can't put a year-round restriction on a home unless it is tied to area median income, and you cannot make it in perpetuity, she said. This allows us to do that. The provisions in the Seasonal Communities designation allow the establishment of a housing trust fund without the need to go through the home rule process, year-round deed restrictions without AMI requirements, and the ability to acquire and develop housing earmarked for public employees. It also calls for an increase in the residential property tax exemption for year-round residents up to 50%. The adoption of bylaws allowing so-called tiny houses on undersized lots, and the creation of an advisory council on seasonal communities. We're living to fight another day on the transfer fee, but the tools and policies in this Seasonal Communities designation will further enable Nantucket to take urgent action to preserve community, said State Senator Julian Cyr, Democrat of the Cape and Islands. This is a very big win for the community. He said that the establishment of the Seasonal Communities designation will redirect the discussion on Beacon Hill about housing legislation through a specific lens. I hope this framework will make the case for moving ahead, Cyr said. What it will enable us to do is really show that we are doing everything possible, using every tool at our disposal to address the housing crisis. My hope is speedy deployment of these tools will further shine a light on the need for real estate transfer fee program. Holland said that he hopes that the advisory council created by the legislative provisions will lead to more definitive ways to effectively use the Seasonal Communities designation. A certain amount of relief from the state procurement process is being talked about, he said. The public procurement process can add a significant cost to developing affordable housing projects. We'll have to see if that comes out of the council's work. Town housing officials have been dealing with the restrictions on earmarking affordable housing units for municipal employees. in the plans for the redevelopment of the Wiggles Way project at 31 Fairgrounds Road. Christy Ferrantella, the town's housing director, said provisions in the new legislation will open up the door to being able to create housing for town employees. We're still wading through the details of how this might work, she said, but it would be huge for the town. Also, it definitely makes it easier to implement some policies and make it easier to compete without the affordable restrictions. Ferrantella said that the idea of creating a bifurcated housing market on the island is not new in affordable housing circles. Our goal is to create another market focused on year-round housing, she said. Towns in California and Colorado recently released a report that said that nearly half of year-round housing is deed-restricted and will stay in year-round use. These are tools that are really going to help us do that. Still on the front page, our next story is headlined, Tom Nevers Beach Still Littered with Erosion Debris by Kay Quigley. The beach at Tom Nevers is still littered with decades-old chunks of concrete and metal from the former Navy base that stood there over 50 years ago, uncovered in recent years by steady erosion of the bluff overlooking the ocean. That's despite town meeting voters approving $4.2 million in spending in May to clean things up and restore the eroded dunes. So what's the holdup? Town manager Libby Gibson said last week the project will require more time and money than initially thought. Cleanup efforts may not begin for another year or more, she said. Successive winter storms this year caused the Tom Nevers beach bluff to erode 30 to 40 feet, and as a result, the project has incurred further delays, Gibson said in a statement to the Inquirer Mirror last week. The winter storms unearthed and scattered additional structural remnants of the buildings on the Navy base in January. The Tom Nevers bluff has been steadily eroding, Gibson said. Plans were in place to restore the bluff were almost complete in the late 2023, she said, but now must be revised to reflect the new topography of the coastline. That, combined with the labor involved, will make for a more expensive bill than the town anticipated. This type of work may come at a significant cost, likely beyond the 2024 annual town meeting appropriation associated with the debris removal, Gibson said. She said the town is trying to secure federal funding to supplement the $4 million already approved, instead of asking islanders to vote for another appropriation. The town will be hiring contractors for the work because it would be too much of an undertaking for the Department of Public Works, Gibson said. The town doesn't have the staff or specialized equipment necessary. To implement such a project, the general contractor will have to be supported by subcontractors for asbestos mediation, site remediation for contaminated soils throughout all excavation processes, and potential unexploded ordnances on site, Gibson said. Before the task is outsourced, however, the town must acquire a long list of permits from the state agencies that will allow it to do the work. That could take 12 to 18 months, Gibson said. Once that is done, the money can be borrowed and work can begin, she said. Until then, the area remains an actively eroding bluff edge, and the public is advised to always keep a safe distance, Gibson said. The Navy base was active on the island from 1956 to 1976. It was of importance during the Cold War, according to historical records. Enlisted soldiers would analyze frequencies in the ocean to detect and classify targets like submarines. That work was classified at the time the base was active. 3 years after being decommissioned in 1980, the property was bought by the town for $525,000. Several buildings used to stand on the property, but over time most have either succumbed to erosion and fallen into the Atlantic or have been demolished by the town to be saved from that fate. Around 1995, the largest structure on the base, the terminal building, was taken down because erosion was threatening it. The Inquirer Mirror reported the building just being inches away from the bluff in June of 1995. Today, the property serves as a recreation area with a baseball and softball diamond, an overgrown outdoor roller hockey rink, and picnic tables. For years, it hosted the annual. Our next story is headlined, Top PFAS Experts. Nantucket has unique opportunity to combat forever chemicals by Dean Geddes. The bad news? PFAS is everywhere, even more than we thought, and there are no easy ways to get rid of the chemicals. The good news? Nantucket has a better opportunity than most communities because the island is a closed system and can tackle the issues on a local level. That's according to some of the top PFAS experts in the world who gathered in front of a packed house in the Dreamland Studio Theater last Thursday for a special talk on the so-called forever chemicals. The group pointed to what happened at the Nantucket Fire Department, which they said led the nation in acquiring turnout gear with substantially less PFAS material. They said local leaders, including the Board of Health, have vast authority in regulating PFAS on the island, and because there are no neighboring towns, Nantucket doesn't have to worry about cross-contamination. The panel consisted of Kayla Bennett, the Director of Science Policy for Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility, Graham Peasley, Professor Emeritus in Notre Dame's Department of Physics and Astronomy, Eric Olson, the Senior Strategic Director for Health at the National Resources Defense Council, and a whistleblower from the Federal Environmental Protection Agency who requested not to have their name published. It was moderated by David Abel, a Boston Globe journalist and professor at Boston University. The event was put together by the Nantucket PFAS Action Group and the Nantucket Land and Water Council. The experts didn't mince words when it came to their condemnation of the current state of affairs nationwide. The EPA has regulated less than 2% of PFAS compounds, Bennett said. It's going to be the most expensive program we've ever had. It will dwarf asbestos and lead. Peasley said that the hundreds of newer PFAS compounds that haven't been tested are being labeled as, quote, safe, unquote, by industrial companies. Peasley's on the cutting edge of finding ways to test for and identify PFAS. So far, he said, he hasn't seen any, quote, safe and, quote, new PFAS. I've never met a good PFAS, he said. Some have less toxicity, some can be eliminated faster by the body, but the more we study, the more we find. What we are learning is that you find one or two of them in a test, there are probably others. Olson called the current situation a, quote, toxic treadmill, end quote, where the chemical industry is creating new PFAS compounds faster than they can be adequately studied. You're never going to be able to catch up with the chemical industry, he said. That's why PFAS need to be regulated as a group. At the conclusion of the talk, R.J. Turcotte of the Land and Water Council briefed the crowd on his organization's PFAS well testing program, which uses a cutting-edge method created by Peasley called the PIGE, which stands for Proton-Induced Gamma Emissions method. It screens water for the presence of fluorine and fluorinated compounds, which are the F in the PFAS. The test doesn't, however, specify which type of PFAS are found. It's a cheap, relatively quick way to get an answer to an important question. Is my water safe to drink? Turcotte said. That's a hard answer to find. He said the program has sampled hundreds of wells on Nantucket, sending the water samples by mail to Peasley. As a control, roughly 10% of the wells they test will be tested with a much more expensive EPA-approved method in order to compare the two test results. Turcotte said that the next step will be to create a website that can guide property owners whose wells test positive. Those next steps, what to do if your well does test positive, seem to be on the minds of a lot of the attendees of Thursday's event. Most of the question and answer session was dedicated to people asking that very question. We want to have a website dedicated to help people choose the right water filter, where and how to get their blood work done, Turcotte said. Our next article is headlined, Survey. 70% favor at least some STR restrictions by Dean Geddes. 70% of Nantucket residents are in favor of restrictions on short-term rentals, according to a survey conducted by Emerson Polling, commissioned by Act Now, a local political action group that has long pushed for significant restrictions on STRs. It was sort of shocking, Act Now co-founder Peter McCausland said. We did a cheap survey a couple of years ago, and it said most people favored restrictions, but it was a lot closer. This time we decided to get a scientific survey by a reputable place that does this. I'm sure this is going to be attacked, but Emerson's survey capability has a great reputation. The survey was conducted through a random sample of 250 residents with a margin error of 6.1%. 33 respondents, or 13%, said they short-term rent their home on Nantucket, while 80% of respondents said that they believe Nantucket homeowners have a right to rent. 70% said they believe short-term rentals have taken away long-term housing from local residents, and 83% said that there is a housing crisis on the island. A majority also felt that short-term rental stresses the environment, 63%, and the infrastructure, 64%. The full results of the survey can be found at https:// College Polling, all one word, .com /Nantucket-survey / Stephen Morey, an island real estate agent who authored a short-term rental-related citizens warrant article for the September special town meeting, along with attorney Stephen Cohen, and helped draft Article 1, the Select Board's collaborative effort with citizens, was one of the 250 people who took the survey. He said he had concerns about some of the questions that felt loaded and primed people in a certain direction. They included a question that asked, quote, "Did you know that more than 80% of investor STRs are owned by off-islanders?" End quote. And another that referred to investor-owned STRs as, quote, "essentially mini hotels," end quote. Still, he said he agrees with Act Now that STRs need some restrictions, and the disagreement comes in exactly what those restrictions or regulations are. I'm one of the 70%, and I think Article 1 is a step in the right direction, he said. It's actually kind of alarming that almost 30% of people said we don't need restrictions at all. Hardliners on both sides of the issue object to certain parts of Article 1, and for me that's a good indicator that it's a compromise. Act Now's report accompanying the survey said it was conducted by contacting residents' cell phones via text and email, along with an online panel. A message to Emerson College seeking more information was not returned. McCausland said that Act Now did not script the questions or the wording, but rather gave Emerson an outline of the issue. We told them that this has been a contentious issue. We talked about investors and year-rounders who rent, and then they designed the survey, he said. Younger islanders and the working class are the ones most likely to believe that STRs aggravate the housing crisis. For people who make between $25,000 and $75,000 a year, 87% believe that short-term rentals stress infrastructure, and 87% believe they contribute to the housing crisis. For people making more than $150,000 or more, those numbers drop to 48% and 56%, respectively. For people aged 18 to 39, 91% believe short-term rentals have taken away long-term housing. That number drops to 51% for people 50 to 69. This survey comes a month before another special town meeting where voters will be tasked with once again voting on articles attempting to bring some clarity and regulation to short-term rentals. Article 1, the collaborative effort between the Select Board and a group of citizens, has the backing of the Planning Board and the Finance Committee. Act.Now opposes it. in a broad sense because it's too lenient and because it would allow short-term rentals in the residential zoning code under the term, quote, Nantucket vacation rentals, end quote, albeit only if they comply with certain restrictions. Article 2, a citizen's article from Charity Benz, and put Nantucket Neighborhoods First, a group with membership that overlaps with Act Now's, is much stricter. The survey also included favorability numbers for the Select Board, Act Now, and other groups involved in the short-term rental debate. The Select Board had a 23% favorable rating, with a 51% of respondents saying that they held an unfavorable view, and 26% were unsure. As for Act Now, 34% had a favorable view, 20% unfavorable, and 46% were unsure. Our next story is headlined, Man Dies After Being Pulled from Surf at Maya Comet by Kay Quigley. An 80-year-old man who was pulled unresponsive from the surf at Maya Comet Beach by beachgoers and lifeguards on Monday afternoon has died. We gave it our best effort. Between us, the patrons, and the Nantucket Fire Department, we gave this guy everything we could to try and help him, Harbor Master Sheila Lucy said on Tuesday. The incident happened around 4 p.m. on Monday. A witness said that they saw the man, whose identity had not been released by press time, floating face down in the water about 30 feet from the beach, and waved over a lifeguard who helped get him out of the water. Additional lifeguards arrived soon after, Lucy said. They performed chest compressions on the man and brought him to an ambulance that was waiting in the parking lot, which transported him to Nantucket Cottage Hospital. They did everything by the book. As soon as we knew somebody was in distress and unresponsive, we responded immediately, Lucy said. We got him out of the water as quickly as possible, and the rest of the lifeguards shut up very quickly, as did the fire department, she said. We gave the guy the best we had. It is unknown at this time how long the man was unconscious in the water before being pulled out. And finally, we have the district court report with the headline, Drunk Driving Charges Top Court Docket by Kay Quigley. Drunk driving charges topped a busy docket in Nantucket District Court this week. Michael Holgate, 56, of 8 Vesper Lane, pleaded guilty to October 30th, 2023 charges of operating a motor vehicle under the influence of alcohol and negligent operation of a motor vehicle. The charges stem from the same night that the Main Street fountain was toppled by a pickup truck around 10 p.m. Police traced the vehicle that hit the fountain back to Holgate's Island Laundry, a business owned by Holgate, which the truck was registered to, and encountered Holgate soon after as he approached the Vesper Lane property driving a white van. He was subsequently arrested. Clerk Magistrate Don Hart determined in February there was not enough evidence to charge him with the destruction of the fountain. William Burns, 29, of Lincoln, was arraigned on July 30th charges of operating a motor vehicle under the influence of alcohol, negligent operation of a motor vehicle, and a marked lanes violation. Not guilty and not responsible pleas were entered on his behalf, and he was ordered to return to court September 16th for a pretrial hearing. Eric Gate Rodriguez, 26, of Cow Pond Lane, was arraigned on June 17th charges of misdemeanor receiving stolen property. Not guilty and not responsible pleas were entered on his behalf, and he was ordered to return to court August 13th for a pretrial hearing. After completing 1 year of probation without violation, Breck Holdridge, 36, of Wakefield, Rhode Island, had a March 7, 2021 charge of violating an abuse prevention order dismissed. Charles Manville, 40, of Nantucket, was acquitted by a jury on February 17, 2023, charges of vandalizing property, misdemeanor malicious destruction of property, and malicious damage to a motor vehicle. After being continued without a finding for 6 months and completing his probation without a violation, Devin Murphy, 49, of 3 Alexandra Avenue, had a January 26, 2023 charge of assault and battery dismissed. Luan Santos Ferreira, 25, of 63 Maya Comet Avenue, will have a May 5th charge of unlicensed operation of a motor vehicle continued without a finding for 2 months on the condition he pay $750 in court costs. He also had March 17th charges of assault and battery and strangulation or suffocation dismissed due to a lack of prosecution. Julia Dyson, 18, of Riviera Beach, Florida, was arraigned on August 3rd charges of operating a motor vehicle under the influence of alcohol, negligent operation of a motor vehicle, making an improper turn, forging or misusing her license, and possessing or using a false or stolen license. Not guilty and not responsible pleas were entered on her behalf, and she was ordered to return to court September 16th for a pretrial hearing. Maladis Mureka de Carranza, 48, of 20 Gregland Avenue, was arraigned on August 4th charges of operating a motor vehicle under the influence of alcohol, negligent operation of a motor vehicle, possessing an open container of alcohol in a vehicle, and failure to stop for police. Not guilty and not responsible pleas were entered on his behalf, and he was ordered to return to court August 13th for a pretrial hearing. Anna Carolina Venturin, 24, of Marlborough, was arraigned on an August 3rd charge of operating a vehicle with her license suspended. The charge will be dismissed on the condition that she pay $500 in court costs. Galiza Francis, 35, of 39 Macy Lane, was arraigned on August 4th charges of operating motor vehicle under the influence of alcohol, leaving the scene of property damage, negligent operation of a motor vehicle, and operating a motor vehicle with a license suspended. Not guilty and not responsible pleas were entered on her behalf, and she was ordered to return to court August 13th for a pretrial hearing. Corizi Everett, 25, of 3 Sesman Way, was arraigned on an August 5th charge of operating a motor vehicle with his license suspended. The charge will be dismissed on the condition that he pays $200 in court costs. That's all I have time for. This is your reader, Chuck Gifford, saying goodbye, and thanks for listening.